Oh, old school comic reviews. Got a random comic book today. This is Marvel Chillers number 6, featuring Tigra the Werewoman from 1976. The story is called Soul Catcher. It's written by Tony Isabella. The artist is John Byrne, and the inker is Frank Springer. Basically, when we open it up, we are right in the middle of a scene where Tigra is kind of chained to some sort of doomsday device or some sort of death trap or whatever, and it's about to go off. And then at the bottom of the opening splash page, we can see somebody shouting. You can't see the person, and it says, "Beware, woman!" And then you turn the page, and it's a double page splash of the Red Wolf, who's one of the good guys, and his pet wolf Lobo, running at Tigra, and he's throwing his tomahawk at her. And then we turn the page again, and we find out that he wasn't actually aiming at her. He was really aiming at her chain. So he breaks her shackles and, gets her loose, and they kind of compare notes, and they decide to have a team up. And so they're going to go after the main bad guy, who is a guy called Joshua Plague. And then we get some subplot stuff with some other characters, and then we come back to Joshua Plague, and he's having there's a little dispute within his group. The group is called the Rat Pack, and they're kind of these, I guess, criminal mercenary types, and they're a little bit upset with Plague because he's kind of taken over the group, and they're kind of like, who are you to take over our group? Why should we follow your orders, you? And Joshua holds up this magical staff, I guess, which is the actual Soul Catcher, and it releases some energy waves, and like all the Rat Pack guys are on the floor and they're writhing in pain, except for Joshua Plague's one sidekick, who is Rat Pack member number 5. And then by this time, Tigra and Red Wolf come upon the scene, and there's a big fight, and it's going back and forth, and Tigra and Red Wolf are just a little bit astounded because they can't figure out why Joshua Plague and number 5 are so strong. And then we get a little twist here where we find out that number 5 is in fact a robot. And then right then we get our second twist, which leads into the big cliffhanger, where we find out all along that Joshua Plague has been the Super Skrull, who is a ship-shaping alien from another planet who has all the powers of the Fantastic Four. And then that's it for this issue, and it says, "Be here in 2 months for the Mask of the Green Death." Okay, this is pretty much, it's a pretty typical, pretty actually average comic for the time period. It's not great, it's not terrible, it's just very average. Basically, you pick up, you get a little action, you get a little subplot, you get a little soap opera. There's just a wee bit of introspection with the Tigra's character, and then you get some more fighting and stuff here. It's pretty funny. There's kind of a self-aware, campy element to it, where at one point, when Tigra and Red Wolf, catch up with Joshua Plague, let's see here, the assistant says, right here in the dialogue, the assistant says, "Mr. Plague, it's Tigra!" And then there's a caption that actually says, "Let's give Numero Cinco some credit. At least he didn't add, she's alive," to that, just kind of pointing out the sort of, they're aware of like how campy all this stuff sort of is. And that's the thing, a lot of the Marvel comics at that time kind of had this sort of, even in serious stories, they kind of had this kind of jokey sort of self-referencing, I should say, self-referencing type of humor. What else here? It's good enough for what it is story-wise. Like I said, not anything that's going to change anybody's lives. It's just a fun little romp. The art is pretty decent by John Byrne. I think this is right around the time he first came to Marvel. He might have come like a year or two before, but he hadn't become quite a superstar yet. Matter of fact, this is from 1976. I'm pretty sure he hadn't even started the X-Men yet. And his art's kind of, it's not bad or anything like that, but it's a little bit looser than what he would do on that title, you know. What else we got going on here? Oh, well, here, let's talk about the cover. The cover kind of cracks me up just because these days when you go into the comic book stores, you know, more and more you see these covers that really are just like kind of these sort of like pin-up things, you know. Less and less do you get any sort of idea about, you know, what's going to go, be inside the actual comic. But here, you know, this is back in the days where, you know, there wasn't any trades or anything like that. And the comic book companies, you know, they had to try to win people over, you know, every month with each issue, you know. So, you know, you got all this kind of crazy garish stuff going on right on the cover, right here on the cover. You know, here's Tigra, she's chained up somewhere. Here's Red Wolf, he's, you know, throwing his tomahawk. And he's not just throwing it, he's running at her and throwing it. And he's all... and he's all, die, werewolf, die! And, you know, it's the Marvel Age of Comics Phase 2! You know, it's Night of the Wolf! You know, all these exclamation points and, you know, just, you know, you gotta be part of it! Don't miss out! This is exciting! Pick it up, kids! You know, so, you know, and I'm not saying like every comic you pick up today, you know, won't have what's going on, but more and more it just seems like, you know, it's just, like I said, just some sort of pin-up, you know, oh, look at me, I'm Iceman. And then you flip through the comic, Iceman's probably in it for like, you know, 2 pages or something like that. But at least here they're trying to convince you that something exciting was going on. And let's talk about this. This is Tigra, and she's wearing pretty much more or less a variation of the same costume that she wears, you know, these days. And let's face it, it's basically just a bikini, you know what I mean? But the thing is here, you know, it's kind of a modest bikini, you know, everything's pretty much covered up. And in the actual comic, you know, you don't get a lot of weird stuff that you get in some of the comics now. And I think it's really just certain artists who kind of cross the line every once in a while. And, you know, and editors just letting it go through. But you don't have Tigra, you know, bending over in these sort of like weird, sexy poses, or, you know, there's not this stuff where you see with some guys where they've obviously, you know, Photoshop some art from Maxim or Playboy or something that's just overly, that's way more sexy than it needs to be. And like I said, you know, here it's a swimsuit, but it's a modest swimsuit, you know, it's not one of these butt floss thongs, you know what I mean? Now, of course, you know, let's face it, it's the mid-'70s, it's a code-approved comic, you know, and there's lots of stuff they just couldn't get away with doing at the time. But, you know, it's still pretty much at a respectful tone. I mean, I wouldn't be, you know, afraid to give this comic book to a kid. I wouldn't be embarrassed if some, you know, to show this to like a grown woman or anything like that, you know. It's just a campy little superhero comic. Sure, the character's sexy, but it's not, you know, skanky or porny or anything like that. What else? In a letters page here, this is kind of interesting. There's a letter from Ralph Macchio, who was a guy that right at this time period would get letters printed in comic books like all the time. And he actually, like maybe a few years later, actually did become a writer and editor down at Marvel Comics. And basically, he talks about how he liked Marvel Chillers 4. And then he ends his letter with nothing much left to say, except to wish you all a most successful run on Tigra. Hopefully, she may be the first of Marvel's femme fatales to make it in her own book for longer than 6 issues. And then the reply here, the editors here, I'm guessing maybe it's Marv Wolfman is the editor, says, as you read these words, Tigra's made it to 4 issues with Red Sandra up to 5. In the words of Freddie Prinze, we're looking good. And for people who don't know, Freddie Prinze was an actor on television at that time, who is indeed the dad of Freddie Prinze Jr. Let's see here. What else is interesting here? There's a Hostess fruit pie ad with Captain America and Red Skull and the Cosmic Cube. And then they have ads for other Marvel comics here in the bullpen bulletins. Oh, this is funny. At this particular month, there's a bunch of anniversary issues just happened to come out in the same month. So X-Men 100 went on sale. Avengers 150, Captain America 200, and it doesn't say it here, but I'm pretty sure Thor 250 came out that same month. There's stuff in here about how to win no prizes, and no prizes were these things that Marvel would give away if you maybe found a mistake or continuity error or something like that in one of the stories, and the editors couldn't explain it away. There's announcements pretty soon, comics featuring Cull the Destroyer, Wood God, Nova, and in Stan Lee's soapbox, Stan Lee talks about how Bring On the Bad Guys is coming out, which was a book that pretty much gave the origins for a lot of the old Marvel supervillains. Okay, and that's it. Like I said, a pretty fairly typical comic from 1976. Thanks a lot for listening, and you all have a great day.